Hey YouTube, this is Naya. I'm here today to talk about how civil rights ruined black people. Most people know what civil rights are, but for those who don't, civil rights are the rights that black people gained, and I say that term very loosely, after the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was enacted. A lot of people know it as the law that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and many other political activists fought for to gain civil rights for black people, and they did so foolishly. Now, I'm going to go into the rights that we gained under the Civil Rights Act. Blacks, because of the Civil Rights Act, have the right to vote, have the right to buy from white people, attend school with white people, work for white people, and receive benefits from the government. Most people know that the purpose of this act was to end discrimination against black people and to end segregation of whites and blacks. Most people, however, do not know that before the Civil Rights Act, there was a town called Greenwood in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which was also known as the Black Wall Street. It was basically an all-black community where blacks owned their own businesses, such as grocery stores, newspapers, and movie theaters, and it was populated by several black professionals, such as pilots, doctors, and lawyers. What happened to Greenwood, Tulsa, Oklahoma, you might ask? Well, the Tulsa race riots of 1921. Basically, there were white supremacists and other white people who were jealous of this Black Wall Street community and decided to burn it down. And they did burn it down. They burned down all the businesses, and a lot of the people who were living there also were injured in the burning of the community. Now, a lot of people might think, okay, well, they had all this money, why didn't they just rebuild it? They tried, and they attempted to rebuild it. There were some pushbacks from the local governments as far as zoning out the community, so they would have a hard time rebuilding it, but they tried up until the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was enacted. After the Civil Rights Act was enacted, the people of Greenwood basically abandoned their attempts to rebuild the community because after the Civil Rights was enacted, they were able to buy from white people. They were able to move into white neighborhoods. They were able to work for white people. So there was really no need to, in their minds, rebuild their jobs, rebuild, their schools, rebuild everything that they had and just continue what they were doing before. Because now they can just do the same thing, but work for white people, shop from white people, live in white communities, etc. And continuing on to today, where are we now? Several years after the Civil Rights Act has been enacted. Well, now, blacks have the highest unemployment rate. The black unemployment rate is 9.6%, while the white unemployment rate is only 4.4%. The black unemployment rate is more than double that of the white unemployment rate. Today, blacks are also poor. While the average household income of whites per year is $111,000, the average household income of black families per year is $7,000. $7,000. That's it. But ironically, blacks still seem to be the highest consumers in this country. Blacks consume at a rate of over $1 trillion per year. Now, how are blacks so poor but able to consume at such a high rate? Well, that's because blacks, even high-earning blacks, spend their money with white businesses, so they don't keep it. They earn money and they give it to the white community. And blacks are not producers. They are not, generally speaking, business owners, and they are not selling products. They are only buying them. And they're not, offering services. They're only receiving them. So, and blacks are also miseducated. Blacks are mostly attend public schools. Public schools are ran by the government, which is white. And what blacks learn in school is decided by white people. If you open any history book in a public school, you will notice that the history pertaining to African Americans always start with slavery. However, it's almost common sense that black history started way before slavery did. But that's not taught in our public school system. Let's go through all of the rights that blacks gained under the Civil Rights Act. So let's start with voting. Voting was not a victory because black issues are still not addressed by politicians. And it's mainly because politicians do not care about black issues. Even the black politicians do not address black issues specifically. Politicians care about whoever pays them to care. And Claude Anderson, he is an expert on this topic, and he wrote a book called Powernomics, where he basically explains that black people need to build their economic base in order to influence political change. So if you want to learn more about that, you need to pick up Powernomics. That sounded like an ad, didn't it? It's not. I am not endorsed by Claude Anderson. I just really like his work. Buying from whites was not a victory. The Civil Rights Act specifically says that whites aren't able to discriminate for public accommodations. So, which basically means that whites can't prevent black people from spending their money in their businesses. So, of course, now that blacks have the right to spend their money with white establishments, they do, and they do so very well. Again, over $1 trillion per year. And this prevents blacks from being producers. Before they were able to spend with whites, they were forced to have their own businesses. Now, they just don't have to anymore. Being able to attend school with whites was not a victory for blacks, because that is the cause of blacks being miseducated about their history and who they are as a people. That's very important, to know who you are as a person and know your history and know that it was more than slavery. I mean, there are a lot of black people who think that's all black people are or were is slaves. And it's really sad. So, without or being able to go to school, whites prevents blacks from starting their own schools. And it's interesting, and I'll probably make a whole nother video about this, the Plessy v. Ferguson, where, the Supreme Court said that it was constitutional to have separate but equal schools, versus Brown v. Board of Education, where that decision was overturned, and the Supreme Court basically said that even if schools were exactly the same facility, had the same caliber of teacher, have the same, physical location, that, of the same quality, it's still not enough, because black children will feel inferior if they're not allowed to sit in a white classroom with a white student. Anyway, moving on to working for whites. Of course, this leads to black people being dependent on whites. They can't sustain themselves. They can't eat. They can't live anywhere unless a white person gives them a job. And that's a terrible place to be. And it also prevents blacks from starting their own business. If they didn't have the right to work for whites, they will be forced to create their own jobs and hire other blacks. And finally, being able to receive government benefits is not a victory for blacks. It just keeps them dependent. And also, there's several laws that, have the effect of separating black households because in order to get benefits, a man can't be living in the home. However, with all that said, there is a silver lining. Blacks do not have to exercise their civil rights, and blacks need to understand that. They can voluntarily choose not to work for whites, not to buy from whites, not to attend school with whites, okay? Not to be dependent on government benefits. A right is not a requirement. The Civil Rights Act does not say that blacks must buy from public accommodations owned by whites or must be employed by whites. It just says that whites can't discriminate against blacks based on their race. Okay, so in order to solve this problem, blacks need to make a conscious decision to reverse the oppression that these rights are having on black people. First, blacks need to withhold their black votes. While we take the time to build our economic structure where we could really start influencing politicians, there are political activists such as Tariq Nasheed who suggest that black people withhold their votes is all we have. So instead of just giving it freely, because some Democrats, for example, might think, oh, blacks are just going to vote for, me anyway. Don't. Make them work for it. Also, blacks need to start black businesses and start supporting black businesses. That's the only way that blacks are going to be able to build wealth and retain wealth. Keep it in the black community. That's the only way to bring up our net worth as a people. Blacks need to start creating and supporting black schools. That way we will be in control of what goes into our children's minds. We can teach them that they do not have to be dependent on whites and that they were more than slaves. There are several black activists such as Boyce Watkins and Umar Johnson who have already started the progress of building and creating black schools. Work for black businesses. Keep your talent in the black community. There are a lot of talented blacks, and then they go and work for white companies and corporations and make those white companies and corporations make even more money when they can be keeping that money in the black community and building black wealth. And of course, blacks need to be self-sustaining generally. I mean, if you aren't super elderly or sick to the point where you are unable to work, there's no reason that you should be receiving government benefits. And a lot of people may turn to government benefits because they are unemployed and they can't get a job. But of course, if we practice all of these steps, building black businesses, and there wouldn't be that worry of having to beg a white person for a job. There will be jobs in your own community that you can be hired within, okay? So hopefully one day, I have a dream that one day black people will start doing these things instead of letting the Civil Rights Act hold them down.